On the night they sold Mara to the Nephilim, the priests called it a wedding. That was the first lie. The second was softer, that she had been chosen, blessed, favored above other women. But she knew the truth the moment her father would not meet her eyes. By lamplight, they led her up the temple steps in white linen, while the village watched in the kind of silence that tells you everybody knows, and nobody will save you. Later, after the songs, after the bronze doors shut, after she heard the one name no bride was meant to hear, Mara sat alone with blood on her thighs and the wedding veil across her lap. She took a bone needle from her sleeve and stitched a secret into the hem, not a prayer, a weapon made of thread. The women told her first. They came with oils, fine linen, and careful smiles, saying the temple had favored her house. Favored. Their roof leaked, the grain jars were low, and her father coughed blood into rags at dawn. Nothing about their house looked favored. It looked cornered. They washed her, perfumed her, and measured her for a veil too fine for a poor man's daughter. No one said bridegroom, only blessing, offering, covenant. By sunset, the whole village knew. No one looked her in the eye. That frightened her more than the ritual. A town can survive hunger. It cannot survive the moment decent people decide silence is easier than truth. Her father confessed in pieces. The temple had cleared his debt. There had been grain, oil, goats, silver, enough to keep the family alive through winter. Enough to buy a weak man the lie that survival and betrayal were not the same thing. Mara searched the room after he stumbled out and found the temple ledger. Barley, oil, goats, silver. And beneath them, neat as a market line, one daughter of Eliab, untouched, of age. For one breath, she could not move. There it was, her whole life reduced to inventory. She did not cry. She went still. Her heart broke, and her mind woke up. When the temple women returned, Mara lowered her eyes and said she was ready. It was the first performance of her life. They dressed her in the lower chambers beneath the temple, where they wrapped brides and bled lambs. Behind a bronze partition, she heard the priest speaking to him. One voice was the high priest's. The other was older, rougher, wrong somehow, as if human speech had to force its way through stone. Then the high priest whispered a name, not a title, a true name, spoken low, as if even the walls should not hear it. The lamps trembled when the creature answered. Mara learned 3 things at once. The priests feared what they served. The thing they served feared its own name, and names like that were never spoken unless they mattered. She looked down at the unfinished hem of her veil. For the first time, she stopped thinking about escape. She started thinking about what could be hidden. After midnight, they pushed her through a bronze door and left her there. The chamber beyond was half temple, half prison. He stood in shadow near the far wall, too still, too large, like a cliff face waiting for weather. The worst thing about him was not size, but silence. When he spoke, his voice made the lamp flame twitch. "They told you I asked for you." Mara said, "No, they told me God did." Something like disgust crossed his face. That was enough. The priests had lied to both of them. Hours later, when the chamber quieted and the songs above still droned through stone, Mara took the bone needle from her sleeve and stitched the hidden name into the inner hem of the wedding veil, tiny and crooked from pain. A frightened woman does not always need a blade. Sometimes she only needs one thing no one believes she kept. They did not keep her in the temple. They sent her to a stone house above a ravine east of the village, where the wind never stopped and the servants never spoke unless spoken to. For 3 months, Mara waited to die, then to be beaten, then stopped waiting and started watching. That changed everything. The servants feared him, yes, but they feared his absence more. When he left, priests came more often. When he refused them, they sent grain, oil, and girls to scrub floors no one had asked them to scrub. This was not worship. It was maintenance, a system dressed up as holiness. By spring, Mara was sick at dawn. The old housekeeper, Devorah, took one look and told her she was carrying a child. That night, the priest came with honey cakes and warm blessings, thanking heaven for continuance. Mara understood then they had not sold her for one ritual. They had sold her for a bloodline. Her daughter was born in a summer storm. Wind beat the shutters while Mara labored through the night, biting the inside of her mouth raw to keep from screaming. At dawn, Devorah laid the child in her arms and said, "A girl." The room changed at once, not because a girl was less, but because a girl was easier to use. Mara named her Hadass before any priest could claim the right. For a little while, that was enough. Then the temple came calling again, not openly. Men like that never call theft by its own name. They arrived with ribbons, figs, and a carved dove, saying the child was due for first blessing before the altar. Hadass went silent the moment the high priest smiled at her. That same night, Devorah told Mara about Keziah, another girl the priests had taken years earlier. She had tried to run. The priests shaved her head, locked her under the temple, and called it madness. Mara took out the veil, found the hidden seam, and understood at last. It was not revenge she had sewn into it. It was insurance. Mara did not move right away. Rushed women got buried. So she watched. Which servant carried messages? Which priest used the front gate? And which slipped through the kitchen court? Which footsteps made Hadass laugh? And which made her go still? The child knew danger before the adults would name it. One afternoon, Mara asked Devorah about Keziah again. The old woman said, "Holy men do not count on our weakness. They count on our decency. Decent women suffer quietly before they make trouble out loud." The words landed like a slap. That had been Mara's cage all along. That night, she sat beside the cradle, one hand on her daughter's blanket, and whispered, "No." Not to the child, but to the woman she had been. Then she marked the hidden seam with a second thread so she could find the name in darkness. One night, Mara went down to the lower room beneath the east tower and found him standing over old clay tablets and broken seals. Temple records, broken covenants. He looked up and said she should be upstairs. Mara answered that her daughter should be safe. The priests wanted the line kept open, he admitted at last, not for him alone, but for what might come after him. She realized then that she had been sold into a machine. She told him she knew what the priests whispered when they thought women were deaf. His hand closed around her wrist when she said the hidden name. "If you speak it here," he said, "you will kill more than yourself." Proof, not rumor, truth. The name bound him because men had forged a covenant around it before Mara was born. She looked at him and understood something else. Shame lived in him too, just not in the same way. "You should have been born a knife," he said. Mara said, "No, I was born a woman. That's why none of you saw me coming." 3 days later, the formal summons came. The priest would present Hadass for first blessing before the full assembly at sundown. The whole village would witness it. Of course, the high priest wanted witnesses. Men like him preferred theater. Mara dressed her daughter in plain linen and herself in the same white she had worn on her wedding night. Last of all, she took out the veil. The hidden stitches waited in the hem like a pulse. When the Nephilim came to the doorway, dark and still, as a storm someone had taught to stand upright, he told her she still had time to run. Mara fastened the veil and said, "No, I have time to finish it." The procession down the hill was a nightmare dressed as ceremony. Torches, temple boys, murmured blessings, women staring with pity and warning. At the gate, the high priest touched the hem of the veil and nearly found the seam, but Hadass began to cry, and Mara caught her first. They led mother and child into the great hall before the altar. Perfect, Mara thought. Let them all hear it. The high priest began the blessing in that rich, practiced voice that had buried cruelty under ritual for years. He thanked heaven for the child, the line, the covenant that protected the people from plague and famine. Mara almost laughed. Dress up extortion in scripture, and half the town will call it mercy. A priestess behind her adjusted the veil. "Bow your head," she whispered. Mara bowed, not in obedience, but to hide her hand. Her fingers slipped into the seam and broke the final stitches. When the priest stretched out his arms and said, "Bring the child," Mara lifted her head and said, "No." The word hit the temple like a dropped plate. Then she pulled off the veil and opened the hidden hem. The high priest's face emptied of blood before anyone else understood why. The village saw his fear, and that was the beginning. Mara held up the cloth, showed the stitched name in the torchlight, and said, "You sold me. You sold other women before me. You called it holy. It was a ledger." Then she spoke the name aloud. The lamps shuddered. Stone groaned. The oath was dragged into daylight, and daylight ruins certain things for good. The temple did not vanish in one clean biblical moment. That would have been too kind. Pillars cracked, bronze crashed, priests fell to their knees, people ran. The Nephilim moved, not toward Mara, but toward the high priest. The altar basin overturned, the lower chambers thundered shut, and the old hidden bargain began to collapse under the weight of being seen. Mara escaped through the side passage Devorah had once shown her. By dawn, the temple still stood, but only just, smoking, split, stripped of mystery. That was the maddening truth about evil. It rarely disappears all at once. It cracks first. It loses its voice. It leaves stones behind. The high priest survived, but now he had to lie where everyone could see his face. The Nephilim stood alone at the far edge of the ruined court. He inclined his head once, then walked east into the morning haze until the light swallowed him whole. Mara tore the veil open and rose with Hadass in her arms. The women below looked up at her, not with pity this time, but with recognition. That was how the curse really ended, not when the stones fell, when the women stopped bowing,